JONDOO grew up in a community built by the Soviet Union in Mongolia's Tuv province. Her father worked at one of their military bases in the 1980s when the country was still under Soviet control. Landlocked Mongolia is wedged between two superpowers, Russia and China. Even as an independent nation, the two still have major influences here in every aspect of life. To JONDOO, the Chinese influence is at her doorstep. There's a Chinese-owned cement factory nearby. She only uses one name.
Mongolians have become workers for the Chinese. It would be acceptable if it happened abroad, but it's here in our own country where we've become servants for the Chinese.
But Mongolia needs China. Nearly 90% of its exports head there, mostly commodities. This used to be one of hundreds of military bases built by the then Soviets here in Mongolia. Moscow controlled this country until 1990. But the relationship between the two nations has remained tight and one of necessity for Mongolia. More than 90% of the country's oil and gas comes from Russia, but it's also one of the few ways to get exports out.
We have no transit agreement with Russia, but it's clear that to be able to reach our third neighbours physically, we need to be able to get through one of the two neighbours using their infrastructure. This is the big challenge in our foreign policies.
The government has established what it calls the third neighbour policy, looking beyond next door for political and economic agreements. Focus has been on the US, Europe, and elsewhere in Asia, like Japan.
We realized after, being too much dependent on one neighbor or the other, historically, politically and economically, it's relatively very risky. So we wanted just to have this balance and sort of diversification, I suppose.
So with a nation and culture that proudly retains its ancient nomadic roots, Mongolia's leadership has a contemporary challenge on its hands, reaching well outside its neighborhood for new allies and partnerships. Scott Heidler, Al Jazeera, Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia.